Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, we're going to be talking about kind of the second part in this series that we're going over on how to get noticed by your boss's boss. If you did not listen to last Monday, you should do that. This started as a listener question on exactly this topic, on how to get noticed by people in the organization when their direct boss just didn't seem to be doing what they could to elevate this person or to get them noticed, and they reached out for advice, and we shared the article with them, but we thought maybe there were other listeners who would like to know some of the same information. Last week, we talked about the importance of demonstrating your commitment to your own growth and to the growth of the company. We also talked about focusing on the success of the team that you're on rather than just your own success. On today's episode in the series, I want to go over a couple of other things. I want to talk about the importance of knowing the numbers, knowing like the business itself, like what the numbers mean and how to take ownership of them for yourself. And I also want to talk about following through on commitments. So first of all, numbers. Like how can you impact a business if you don't know the business?
And I think there's a difference between kind of like knowing and then understanding the behaviors
True.
and the expectations that it take to move the numbers, right?
True.
I hear quite often people talk about things like, business acumen and what do they know? And it's like, okay, so you can do math, right? Because like math is important. You need to be able to do math to understand how these numbers relate. But that's only a small portion of truly understanding the numbers, because it's such not only is it typically involved or a part of your, maybe your compensation structure or your year-end reviews, and or how much maybe pressure you feel or get from those around you and above you in regards to, are you performing to an expectation or underperforming? Like that, the numbers do matter and they are important in that aspect. But I think when we're talking about getting the attention of other leaders in an organization, it's not just, hey, I memorized these numbers, but it's also like, I've seen these numbers, I've looked at them, I understand what behaviors or approaches or processes or strategies are impacting them positively or negatively, and I probably have a position or an opinion on what we can do to get a better result when it comes to measuring these numbers.
Right. There's somebody said once that if you can't explain something in a way that a 6-year-old would get, then you don't know it well enough. And it talks about basically that anybody can, with enough kind of like basic topical knowledge of something, can regurgitate that information, but it takes someone who truly knows it to be able to explain it to a 6-year-old in a way that they will get it. And this is what this comes down to. Can you simplify it down into a way that allows anybody listening to kind of understand what you're doing and how you play a role in the business, and be able to speak to it at a moment's notice, be able to know it well enough and how things evolve, not just quarterly sit down and look at how things were, but look at how things are going so that you can impact them in the moment, not just talk about what the successes or the failures were of the past. And when I say failures, that's a big part of it too. Being able to accept when you have made a failure. Because if you know the numbers well, then you should know where you do well and where you don't do well, where you could stand to have a little bit of a bump. I remember very clearly touring stores and listening to different leaders of different stores talk about the numbers. We say, hey, tell me about your numbers. And it never failed that whatever numbers they wanted to talk about were the ones that they were doing well in. and there could be like 30 or 40 different scorecards, which is a lot of scorecards, But if you wanted to know where someone was doing well, all you had to do is ask them, tell me about the numbers. They knew the business well. They were a little bit less inclined to talk about where they weren't doing well. And they would opt for talking about numbers that maybe were a little bit less important if they were numbers that they were doing really, really well in. It's fluff. Like, I'm not saying there's never a place for it, but what is most important is find the few, when I say few, like 2 to 5 items that are most important to the organization as a whole, and find out where you fit into those numbers, and talk about them in order, whether you're doing average in them or fantastically in them or terribly in them. And most importantly, if you're not doing well in them, talk about what you can do to get better and make sure that you know that part of it well. And if you are doing well, talk about why. What did you do to get there, and why are you doing well in this particular number or metric? Because if you can't speak to how you got there, then it was a fluke, or it was luck that you got there. So know where your worth lies, where your skill lies, and know where you kind of need to pick it up too.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, because I was thinking the same thing. Is like there's kind of the numbers, the results that are associated with the role that you have. Then from an organizational standpoint, they tend to go a little bit of a bigger picture at the next level, then a bit of a bigger picture at the next level. So, not only understanding the local numbers and results that you may be responsible for, but the bigger picture, the larger approach as an organization. You can say, yeah, we're really excited because these subcategories are showing some growth or whatever. But if you're talking to a boss or your boss's boss and saying, hey, I know organizationally we're looking to, increase our production, our revenue, whatever, by X amount of percent this fiscal year. And I think I found a way to do that locally, but I also have some thoughts on how this can maybe be expanded or shared out, or the approach can be scaled, whatever that might look like. It's important to know, again, not just the numbers that surround you daily, but what does that look like a couple of levels up, so that when you're having those opportunities to have those conversations, you're also talking about the bigger picture in regards to the organization's numbers and priorities that they're looking at. And that is really helpful in providing, not just maybe you're having kind of a perspective about you as a leader, that you are clear and understand what you're responsible for, but that you also have a much larger picture, and maybe even a much larger feeling of ownership of a bigger number or of a bigger strategy, than just what you're locally responsible for.
Right, because keep in mind, if this is how to get noticed by your boss's boss, well, I mean, at the very kind of like numbers level, you get noticed by showing your boss's boss how your work can make your boss's numbers better. Because at the end of the day, your boss's boss probably has people above them too. Right? Like, unless you're pretty high up in an organization, your boss's boss is still several levels down in the organization from the C-suite. And so if that's the case, then they have a boss and they have a set of deliverables that they're responsible for. And what the best way to get noticed by them is to show how your work and your impact and your ideas can make their numbers as a whole better, because now what they're thinking about is, oh, this person can actually make me look better to my boss, and me look better in my next review or my next performance appraisal, whatever that looks like. So yeah, getting noticed by somebody is really goes down to the, what can you do for them? Can you do something for them? And it sounds kind of transactional. You'd like to think you get noticed just by putting in the hard work. You'll get remembered for your hard work, but if you're talking about being able to move up in your career, if you're talking about being able to use this as a platform to take on more responsibilities and more roles, the way to do that is to show your boss's boss and others what you can do for them. Like, specifically, this is how I can impact the business if I'm given this responsibility, or if I'm in charge of this. The next part I want to talk about is doing what you are saying you're going to do. If you make a commitment to do something, you follow through on it, and know what that commitment entails before you commit to it, so that you don't find yourself in a situation where you get labeled as someone who doesn't follow through on their commitments.
Yeah, I think it's such an important part. Just, I think, obviously, overall, from a leadership standpoint, we talk a lot about, the ability to role model behaviors and meet your commitments and build trust and build loyalty amongst your team. But that also, that scales. It scales because, as you were just saying, you become known in a lot of circles as one or the other. Or you're an unknown. They don't know exactly. Are you able to follow up on a commitment, deliver upon something that's being asked of you? And so when you're able to do those things and make a commitment, follow up on it, make sure that it gets done, over time, that kind of becomes what people will, know you for or associate you with. And then that also provides you opportunities then, because then you think about, like, how do tasks get delegated? How are, kind of opportunities to take on more given? You said it a long time ago. I'll never forget the quote that you had from Warren Buffett on a podcast a long time ago, when he was like, he doesn't give his biggest accounts, to people that he's never worked with before. Only those that have made mistakes in the past. Like that's kind of the idea, because he knows that if they made a mistake and they screwed something up and they did it to make it right, that he now knows he can kind of trust them to know that if something else happened, they would take care of it. And that's the same kind of concept in this, is that if you as a leader are known as being somebody who follows up on their commitments, makes sure that they happen, and you have those interactions over time, more people start to, entrust you with different things. That allows the boss to do that for you. That allows the boss's boss to feel like, hey, if we give this to Chris, then we know it'll get done. We know that he'll follow up with this. And that allows them to delegate some things maybe off of their plates to you, which then provides you opportunities to be a little bit, stretched in assignments and expand kind of your scope of influence. But that's kind of the idea here. It's not just about, building the trust and loyalty of your team. It's understanding that over time, this becomes a big, section of how people perceive you as a leader within the organization.
Right. I love that Buffett quote too, because it really speaks to the idea of it being associated with a potential failure, meaning a mistake happened and they rectified it. And so now they get bigger responsibilities. When I say do what you say and do it well, it doesn't mean there isn't going to be roadblocks or hiccups or things that get in the way that derail you. It means that even under those circumstances, you move through it and you follow through and you get the project done anyway. And so like if you're supposed to have something done by next Friday afternoon and the power went out in the office for a week straight, right? And so you had no access to anything. Well, clearly that Friday deadline needs to have some play in it. If you have somebody who's reasonable that you're working alongside, that they understand that. But that doesn't mean that, oh, well, I guess there's nothing. It's what did you do in the meantime? Okay, this is the work that I did where I didn't have power and I couldn't do it. When it came back up again, I showed up. I heard it went up. I went right back to the office or right back to the network and logged in and started getting it done. So yeah, it's a couple days late, but it was done. It was done within the parameters of the totality of everything that happened, even though there were roadblocks or things that popped up that we didn't anticipate or things that couldn't have been planned for, it still got done. And that level of conscientiousness, that level of commitment to doing something when you say you're going to get it done, regardless of what happens, that's the important part. Because there are a lot of people out there who will do what they say they're going to do when the seas are smooth, so to speak, right? When the sailing is going fine and nothing is happening, there are no waves. If you've done something enough times, you can of course get it done because you know exactly what you're getting yourself involved in. It's when those things come up that were unanticipated. Does that derail you? Does that stop the project from happening? Or do you still pull out all the stops to make sure you get it done because you said you were going to? Because at the end of the day, what is just as important as getting done that thing that you said you're going to do is that your name is associated with someone who does what they say they're going to do. And if people can walk away from those situations with you enough times, that becomes your brand. And this is no different than how, here's my periodic parenting reference here. Your kids get tiny responsibilities at first, right? You have to brush your teeth before bed. And if they don't brush their teeth before bed and you have to go do it for them every night, then you kind of sit there and you wait and they don't get anything more until they're ready to do that. When you give them a task of being able to walk home from school on their own, if they stop and do other things, then they don't get to walk home from school for a while, and it's a lot longer before they get more responsibilities. But if they show they can do those little things well, they get more responsibilities. And more responsibilities means more freedom, bigger responsibilities within the family or the organization. This is how life works, is by you start out with little things, people prove themselves, then they get bigger things. Nothing in real life works with, hey, give me the role, then I'll show you what I can do. It's no, look at what I've been able to do for the last month, 3 months, 6 months, 2 years. You should have confidence that when I get a little bit more than this, now I can move forward. It works incrementally like that.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a dive into whatever metrics or numbers you can find, and you probably will have to ask people for this if you don't have access on your own. Talk to your boss, talk to your boss's boss, reach out and find out what those numbers are that are most important to the organization as a whole. ones that you actually could have an impact on. So if somebody says the most important metric to the organization is, overall profit, it's like, okay, I get it. A lot goes into that. Look at some of the things that are measured at your local level, but that are the most important to the organization. And I want you to write those down, and I want you to figure out exactly what those mean. And you'll have to have conversations with people about this if you don't know exactly what they mean. But find people who seem to know what they're talking about, get second opinions on this, and really figure out what these numbers mean and how your role can impact them. Be able to speak to that at a moment's notice, and look at the day-to-day work that you do and tie that work into those numbers or those metrics. If you can't do that, then figure out how to. Figure out how to tie that work into those metrics so that you can speak to how your specific work is getting that done. Because if the work you're doing every day is not part of what those metrics are, it likely isn't going to be work that gets noticed by your boss's boss.
Yeah, I think it's a great call out. And I also think that it's like continuing to think about building and cementing in your leadership brand. Again, not just for those that kind of work for you as a leader, but just overall collectively. And I think these are two really good examples of but kind of pouring in some equity kind of into that space where people can understand who you are as a leader and how you are showing up within the business, but then also with those around you and the leaders that are around you. And again, I think over time, that's what ends up happening is that you kind of expand this leadership brand and you build not only trust and loyalty to your team, but trust and loyalty to all the other leaders that are around you.
Right. And lastly, I've said it before and I will say it again, getting noticed by your boss's boss in terms of what that does for your future career prospects and upward mobility is not a tomorrow process. It is an ongoing process that is slow, and it's methodical, and it can be tedious at times, and you can do things that don't get noticed, and you get frustrated. Don't stop, because the consistency and the long-term commitment to this process is a large part of what will get you noticed. So you have to make sure that no one can look at your efforts on this and tie it to, oh, they're just trying to get this next promotion, or they're just trying to get noticed by their boss's boss. It's a commitment to the business that gets you noticed. It's not a commitment to getting noticed that gets you noticed.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.